I think the problem with fairies and elves and so on and so forth is that they have got squeezed into a rather vulgar image, which involves tinsel wings and pink frocks and pointy hats and so on and so forth. And of course, our human imagination tends to be limited by what has been imagined before. We don't have very sophisticated images for these presences. But it seems to me that more and more the way in which nature works and speaks in ways that have been hitherto uncharted by us bears out the fact that throughout history, civilizations have believed in nature spirits of some kind or another.
Oh. Well, this is, one of my friends, John Milbank,
Mm-hmm.
when he briefly taught in the States for a while, was very adamant that the problem with America was that there were no fairies here, and I had to disabuse him of this and to point out to him that there were people here before the Europeans arrived, and all of them have stories of the hidden people or the small or the little people. It's a universal reality of human culture, and it's interesting how clear the similarities are. What I like about your books, especially, aside from the fact I like the voice, I like the stories, I like the characters, but I put my finger on it just recently, is that there's an approach to questions of mystery and the sacred that I find intensely unattractive. But in your books, your books reflect to be the principium plenitudinus, the great chain of being, is that the natural, the preternatural, the angelic, the supernatural, the divine, seem to be present all in their own modes in a kind of continuum.
Well,
And
I'm very flattered and honored to hear you say that. I don't think I ever set out to write consciously about those things, but I would say that I think I'm conscious of all in my own experience of life. And I think as time has gone on, I think the sense of the interfusion of these different aspects of reality um, is really what's preoccupied me. And I think it's really what got me writing novels. I'm a fantastically lazy person. Um,
good, good. All good writers are,
well,
except of course Trollope.
kind of say so. Uh, but I think what finally impelled me to write was I grew up in a strictly atheist household. It was a very good socialist, socially committed household. Socialist in England is not quite the terrifyingly dangerous political position as it is
I
in
don't
America.
know about that.
I
Very
hasten to say
trepidatious.
they were communists, they were atheists. The only book that my father would never buy me was a Bible. Consequently, of course, I became very fascinated by the Bible. Um, but what I noticed in myself was that I grew up with a kind of instinctive religious feeling, which was initially towards trees and flowers and plants and birds, which is probably probably the latest expression of that is the gardener, because the
Yeah.
principal setting is a garden. Um, and I think I wrote Miss Garnet's Angel because the principal character, Miss Garnet, is starts the story. She's elderly, she's retired, she's also a committed socialist and a strict atheist. And her way of looking at the world is broken apart partly through art and the experience of looking at the wonderful art that you can find in Venice, which happens to be a place I know rather well. Also, partly through falling in love with an unsuitable recipient who turns out to be homosexual and actually more interested in the young boy she's befriended. But it leads through into her rediscovery of the widening power of the religious view. And I wrote that, I suspect, both out of my experience of Venice and my very great love of art. Art appears in a lot of my novels.
Yeah.
Also, I think because I was, in a way, not exactly mourning, but I suppose it was a feeling of what my parents had missed in a wider, more animate vision of the universe. I mean, they were incredibly good people, and I'm incredibly grateful to them in lots and lots of ways. But that whole dimension was missing, and I had to carry it around in secret. So nobody taught me about religion. It was implicit, and I have a feeling, though lots of people are going to disagree, that it's inherent in all children.
No.
I mean, there probably are exceptions. I think it's part of the human psyche that we have a religious disposition. And whether it expresses it through Hinduism or Buddhism or Judaism or Christianity or paganism, it doesn't matter. It's some sense that we are not the sum of everything, and that the world is a deeply mysterious and wonderful place. And we are given an imagination to look into the life of things and have that beauty revealed to us. And really, that's what all my books are about, the revelation of a deep and hidden beauty at the heart of things. It takes different forms, but really, I
Oh.
write the same book again and again, being, as I say, rather lazy.
It's not uncommon, though. I mean, I think if I in a broader sense, though, I think most artists have, a certain world of themes and images that they work variations on. It's in a sense their garden, their special land, their plot to till. Since you brought up what is natural to us psychologically or spiritually, or some of those watching or listening to this may not know that actually, in a sense, being a novelist was sort of a second career for you, right? I
Third.
mean,
It was a
third,
third.
third career. All right. So, well, because well, I mean, apparently, when you wrote Miss Garnet's Angel, it got accepted and it immediately got recognized as a wonderful novel and all that. But before that, you'd been a therapist, right, and a teacher of English literature or world literature. I can't recall.
A bit of both. I taught a lot of world literature when I was working in adult education, but I also taught university students, including students from Berkeley, who came over for a semester in Oxford, where I taught Shakespeare. Then I trained as a Jungian analyst, and I mean, I am no longer a great devotee of Jung, although there's much in his psychology that I still
Yeah.
admire and respect. Um, and it was really only when I wrote Miss Garnet's Angel, and it turned out to be a surprise success, that I finally took the plunge to become a writer, which was a gamble, but mostly has paid off. Um, but I mean, Jung, although, as I say, I have many disagreements with Jung. I think, to his great credit, he did, unlike Freud, who I admire as a person, although I don't agree with his psychology, Jung did very much believe that the human psyche had an important religious dimension. And he often said that it was his task to return people to a religious state of mind, by which he did not mean going to church or saying prayers, or not that he was particularly against those things, but a religious point of view about what it means to be a human being. And for that, I am very grateful. I think that working in that tradition and working a lot with people's dreams and the symbolism of people's dreams that has certainly interpenetrated my writing as a novelist.
Actually, I wanted to, since you again mentioned dreams, um, this is a curious thing. I actually put great stock in dreams myself,
Mm.
never having known exactly why, but in my poor dabblings in fiction, a great number of the stories seem to be about people's dreams. Um, but the curious thing is, I've had dreams at times that have become stories that
Mm.
only afterwards, with the help of others, I was able to understand. Talk about readers being interpreters. I think two stories I sent you, I believe, or that we've talked about. One short one called "The True Helen," and one called
House of Apollo.
The House of Apollo." Both were
Wonderful
dreams.
stories.
Yeah.
Wonderful stories.
Oh, thank you, thank you. Oh, I think so, but I would think so anyway. Luckily, I don't suffer from any excessive humility. So, but the curious thing is they were both very, very vivid dreams.
Mm.
They had to be turned into stories. I mean, the dreams obviously lack. There's a certain fluidity of detail in any dream, but they weren't like other dreams. And there's a third story like that as well. That it's a collection I'm writing now, and I was certain. And I don't think this is just true of things you dream up. I would just think in general, if you're writing well, that that it was that they were gifts in some sense.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so I didn't really resent it when someone else explained them to me better than I could explain them to myself. Or like the House of Apollo ends with an image that clearly echoes the image of Moses seeing God being placed in the cleft in the rock and seeing the God.
I quite often dream my books. I dreamt Mr. Golightly.
Uh,
Woke me up. I was staying with I'd had a quite a serious set of events happen in my life. My father had a stroke. My mother, who had Alzheimer's, had to go into home, and my marriage broke up very badly. And I took flight to an old friend who was living on that. During the night, the Saturday night, I had a dream that I was out on the moors, and this rather modestly dressed middle-aged man turned up, and he explained to me who he was. And I woke up and realized that he was called Mr. Golightly, and I knew exactly what he was doing. He was coming back to rewrite a great work which he'd written many years ago. But the upshot was I stayed with my poor friend a year while I wrote this book. So I was the woman who came to stay. I have very, very often had that experience of, in fact, when I write, when people sometimes say, how do you write? The answer is quite often with great difficulty. But in terms of practical things, I always get out of bed. I never look in the mirror, because if I look in the mirror, I start to see myself from the outside, and I have to stay on the inside. And I always stay in my nightdress. That's the only way I can write anything. And it's because I want to stay in that dreamlike experience. The way in which, in dreams, we widen our consciousness, to take in other levels of understanding that are not available to our probably rather narrow conscious and intellects.